During the summer, we would go and work out at the men's gym at UCLA, the site of some of the greatest pickup games every afternoon. I mean, all the great players in Los Angeles would get together there to test their skills against one another. And Magic would be there, and James Worthy, Michael Cooper, these great Laker players from the 80s. And Wilt Chamberlain would show up and play a little bit with the guys. And he'd been retired for a couple of years, but he's still in tremendous shape. He was the one that grabbed me one day and asked me why I was running up and down the court trying to chase all these little players. Instead, I should park my rear end underneath the basket and play defense and block shots. And that was something I could be really good at. And that was a monumental moment in my career because it completely changed my focus of what I believed basketball to be. And I finally understood what I could really be great at. That carried me to a 12-year NBA career, really, a little 5-minute conversation.
And you are in Australia right now.
You're talking NBA basketball. You're talking great teams. You're talking great individual players.
Takes it off, and there's number 23, and of course Johnny goes nuts.
So we're all getting goosebumps thinking about it now.
I just tried to go out there and play my game.
I have no idea what you're talking about, Adam. I don't like anybody. I'm not a people person.
Strand, you make the pass, yes. Christian, can you catch the ball? Yes.
All the stars were aligned and all the muscles fired at the right time, and I was able to get off the ground and throw one down.
I was saving that as a surprise for you.
And now, introducing your host for In All Airness, Adam Ryan.
Welcome to episode 49. Thanks for joining me. My website, inallairness.com. Just add a / and the episode number to view show notes. In this episode, I'm very happy to welcome Utah Jazz great Mark Eaton to the show. Now, a couple of quick thank yous. First of all, to Heidi, Mark's assistant. Without Heidi's help, the interview itself would not have been scheduled to even take place. And prior to even that happening, I'd also like to thank an Australian friend of mine, Mick Minnis. So thank you, Mick, for actually giving me the contact details that I needed to get in touch with Heidi, who then reached out to Mark on my behalf. Thanks also to Twitter follower Tariq Arslan. When I put the word out for any submissions of questions that you'd like me to ask Mark, Tariq suggested I ask him about a meeting that he had with Wilt Chamberlain in Mark's pre-NBA days. He had a really influential meeting with Wilt the Stilt, so that's included in this conversation too. Thanks again, Tariq, for your contribution to this episode. In this conversation with Mark, you'll learn plenty of things about his career, including his rise from near obscurity in high school to becoming a great of the Utah Jazz and NBA All-Star and 2-time Defensive Player of the Year. Now, onto the show. My guest today is a 2-time NBA Defensive Player of the Year. He was an All-Star in 1989 and led the league in blocks for an incredible 4 seasons. He's one of only 4 NBA players with more than 3,000 career blocks, and to this day holds the all-time single-season block records, a staggering 456. He played over 10 seasons with the Utah Jazz. Mark Eaton, thanks for joining me.
Thank you. I'm great to be here.
Really appreciate your time today. Now, one of the most enjoyable aspects of producing my podcast is when I get to research the career of the upcoming guests, and your rise to the NBA is a really fascinating story, and there's a whole wealth of possible discussion topics and areas that we could possibly chat about. But before we actually get to your high school career, that's about the earliest of where I could find some details about you in some depth. Do you mind just talking about, as a child, what sort of hobbies or interests and sports were you involved in before you even got to high school, Mark?
Oh, I think I was like any other kid growing up in Southern California. I played softball and flag football and a little baseball and a little basketball, but I wasn't really very good at any of them, and I did them just simply because my friends did. And other than that, on the weekends, I spent most Saturdays helping my dad work on boats. That's what he did for a living in the marinas of LA Harbor. Those are basically my hobbies.
I do know that you were particularly into water polo in your early teenage years. Is that correct, or at least at high school?
In high school, yeah. In high school, I played a little water polo because I grew up by the beach. I was always in the water, and it seemed like a natural fit, and it was a lot of fun for a few years.
Just quickly about that, given your height at that stage, how tall were you? Well above 6 feet, I'm guessing?
Oh, yeah, I was probably 6'8" or 6'9" by then, yes.
Okay, so that would have been a pretty handy attribute to have, I guess, as a water polo player, or not necessarily?
Yeah, well, it did because I was the goalie, so I was able to just kind of sit down there on the bottom and then raise up when the players came close to try and score. And I had a big wingspan, so that was effective also in the goalie position. and it was fun.
Good to hear. Now, you mentioned that you're from California. You attended Westminster High School, and from what I've read, your basketball career at that time was not particularly memorable for yourself. How would you describe those days, Mark?
Well, as I tell when I go out and give a presentation, I can only remember being in a game one time, and 3 seconds after the coach put me in the game ended because I was that bad. So I didn't play at all. I was growing a lot. Most coaches are more focused on small players, on guards and forwards, and they really don't know what to do with the big guy for the most part. And so I just languished at the end of the bench, and after high school, just decided that was it for sports. So it was time to go get a job.
Were you actually coerced to even be part of the basketball team at that stage as a high school kid, or did it still interest you in what you could do?
I think a lot of it, I was on the basketball team simply because I was tall and thought that was expected of me. I can't say I really enjoyed it, and I didn't really know how to play that well. But, you're a high school kid, just to do that kind of stuff. So,
yeah, I understand. So you mentioned that you went and then looked at getting a trade. So as far as I believe, you left high school and then moved to Arizona, and you started to attend a trade school there to become an auto mechanic. And then shortly thereafter completing that, you moved back to California, and then you started doing work as a mechanic for a few years.
I did, and I actually got fired from my first job, and then I was working in a tire and auto center in an area called Buena Park, California, and that's where this junior college coach came buzzing around the corner in his car one day and saw this huge guy out there talking to a customer, and came in and started talking to me about giving basketball another try.
Now, that's an excellent story in itself. He was, at the time, I think, an assistant coach with Cypress Junior College, which is where you ended up playing 2 seasons at.
That's correct, yeah.
I've seen some very, very brief footage on YouTube where, as a young man, you're there working under the hood of a car, and then you step out from behind the hood, and obviously you're incredibly tall, and it's quite a jarring piece of footage given your height, so it wouldn't have been probably all that good for your back, I'd assume, bending over and getting underneath cars too often.
No, it wasn't, but I didn't know what else to do. So I really thought, well, at least I could go to trade school for a year and I could get a job and I could make a living and support myself, and then I'll just see where things go from there.
I believe that you also then were asked to show some of your skills to this gentleman that rediscovered you. So that led to a brief tryout of sorts, and then you decided to perhaps recommence your career after a few years?
Yeah, what changed for me there was that he had worked with a couple of players that had gone on to play collegiate and professional basketball, and he knew how to teach what I'll call the big man game, or now they call them bigs. But, it's a different skill set than a guard or a forward would use. And he was willing to take the time to work with me after I got done working every day. And we spent a couple hours in the gym every night, and he'd teach me how to play basketball from a big man's perspective. And that was intriguing to me. And so based on that, I decided to go back to junior college for 2 years at Cypress, and then moved on to UCLA.
Clearly, your basketball IQ and then your overall skills, I guess, developed rather quickly. And I've learned that prior to your second season at Cypress, the Phoenix Suns actually selected you in the 5th round, I think picked 107 in the 1979 NBA draft, which is fascinating. I'm pretty sure I've got the timeline right there. Just for some context, 1979 draft, Magic Johnson was selected number 1 overall. So prior to the draft, were you actually aware that the Suns or any NBA teams actually had some interest in you at that stage?
I just had an inkling because my coach, Tom, that had taught me how to play basketball, he was friends with the assistant coach of the Phoenix Suns, a gentleman named Al Bianchi. I knew they were interested, and back then you could take a flyer on a player and you could hold the rights for them for 364 days, especially if their class had graduated already. So Larry Bird is another example of that. He stayed out of school for a year, and the Celtics actually drafted him after his junior year just to watch him for a year and see if they wanted to pick him up, which obviously they did. The Phoenix Suns, however, watched me for a year and said, I don't know. And there really wasn't much in the way of an offer to go to professional basketball at that point in time, so I chose to stay in college instead.
Yeah, okay. So I read somewhere in amongst the research for the chat today that I think they offered you a deal of sorts where you wouldn't go over to Europe or anything to advance your game any further, so they could sort of keep an eye on you perhaps, or at least stop you from heading overseas. Is that how it sort of worked? Or
Well, no, they didn't do that, but the contract was what was called back then a make good contract, where I would have had to have gone through training camp, all the players, being cut and still be on the team by the end of December in order to be paid for the year. And it was just too big of a risk for me at that point in time. Plus the money back then wasn't that good. It was, I think, $30,000 was the contract. My coach and I talked about it and decided, let's just stay in school and keep working and see what we can do down the road.
Okay, gotcha. Now, I may have the timeline wrong, but from what I understand, the Suns then lost the draft rights to you after that period of time, and you returned back to play another season with Cypress, and I believe you then also led your team to the state championship in 1980. Is that accurate?
That's correct, yes.
How did you go with that second season back at junior college and seeing your game develop again and then taking it to the point where you won the state championship? I'm sure that must have then given you the knowledge.
We had a remarkable head coach, a gentleman by the name of Don Johnson, who had actually played for Coach Wooden at UCLA in the early 50s. In fact, he was his first All-American player.
Oh, wow.
And so he taught a Wooden-style basketball game. And we had a very good team. My junior year, we were 34-2. We lost the first game of the season and the last game of the season. We won 34 straight in between. And then my senior year, we went 31-5, I believe. And then we ended up winning the state championship of California and beating some very good players along the way. In fact, the player in the opposing college was Mr. Kahn, who ended up playing at Oregon State, played in the NBA for a number of years. So at that point in time, then it was time to decide where you're going to go to the big school.
And speaking of the big schools there, you accepted a scholarship to UCLA at the time?
I did.
And then you spent 2 seasons with the Bruins, and that included, during that stage, a pivotal meeting with one of the all-time greats of basketball.
Right. So I didn't play much at UCLA. I sat on the bench again, and then during the summer, we would go and work out at the men's gym at UCLA, which was the site of some of the greatest pickup games every afternoon. I mean, all the great players in Los Angeles would get together there every afternoon to kind of test their skills against one another. And Magic would be there, and James Worthy, Michael Cooper, these great Laker players from the 80s. And then Wilt Chamberlain would show up down there every day, too, and play a little bit with the guys. And he'd been retired for a couple of years, but he's still in tremendous shape. And he was the one that grabbed me one day and asked me why I was running up and down the court trying to chase all these little players. Instead, I should really park my rear end underneath the basket and play defense and block shots, and that was something I could be really good at. And that was a monumental moment in my career because it completely changed my focus of what I believed basketball to be, and I finally understood what I could really be great at, and he showed me what I should focus on, and that carried me to a 12-year NBA career, really, a little 5-minute conversation.
Yeah, that's wonderful to hear that sort of stuff. And just before we touch on the 1982 draft itself, were there some teams in particular that you tried out with or played with in terms of either summer leagues or camps that you attended that rose your awareness even greater around the NBA?
Well, I'll tell you what I did is that after my senior year, I went in, and one of the players that my coach Tom had helped develop was a guy by the name of Swen Nader. And he'd played behind Bill Walton at UCLA. And he'd had a very good NBA career, and he was playing for the San Diego Clippers. So we drove down there, and we got one of the assistant coaches, and we just simply said, if you were in my shoes, what would you do? Where would you go play? And I was not an all-star in college, and there, the big games that everybody gets invited to, no one was calling me. But he told me about a couple places I could go try out that maybe a couple of NBA scouts might be there. And so one was in Cincinnati, and one was in Jersey City, New Jersey. So I just flew there on my own dime and played for a couple days in these games, and a couple of scouts saw me. Yeah. And then we literally got out the NBA statistics, and we looked up all the worst teams in the NBA, and the Utah Jazz are right at the bottom of the list. And my coach, Tom, and we just started calling teams on the telephone.
All right.
It was really telemarketing is how we got a job. And Frank Layden, who was the coach of the Jazz at the time, had just taken over as the head coach. The team was really bad. They were making some changes. He was completely changing their focus from a run up the floor, run and gun kind of team to more of one that was defensively oriented and runs on opportunity. And he came out and watched me play in California. I was playing in a summer league actually for Larry Brown and the New Jersey Nets. And he came out and watched me play and said, I see just enough where I can tell you're kind of a diamond in the rough, but I think we can work with you if you'll come and work with us. He offered me a job, and I moved from LA to Salt Lake City and started my NBA career with the Jazz.
Oh, that's great to hear. And it's really interesting that at that stage you took the the step of actually contacting the clubs, and particularly the ones that you were focusing on that were perhaps down the bottom rung of the ladder initially? And then
who has the best chance to help you develop? It's not going to be one of the top tier teams. You're just going to languish at the end of the bench, right?
Exactly.
I wanted to go somewhere where I could play and develop. So if you go to a bad team, they'll play everybody because they're just trying to find some combination to try and win a game. And so it gave me the opportunity to really kind of get my feet wet out there and learn how to play the basketball game at a pro level. And, if I made some mistakes, it was okay because the team was developing and growing and trying to find its own identity. And so together it worked out well.
That's excellent. We talked briefly about the 82 draft. The Jazz selected you at pick number 72 overall, and your rookie season was the only one that you didn't make the playoffs in as far as being a member of the Jazz. You played in 81 games for that season and you started 32 of them. So what do you think stands out most from your rookie campaign, Mark?
I think defining myself and understanding that I could make it as an NBA player. And there was one game we were playing the Dallas Mavericks, and I blocked like 6 shots in the second quarter after the coach had put me in. And I remember running down the court and looking over and seeing the head coach and the assistant coach looking at each other and nodding to each other. And I knew at that moment that I was probably going to be okay, that I could probably make it in this game and have a good career.
Oh, that's great. And in your first seasons with the Jazz, you had 2 great scorers at that time. This is prior to the Stockton and Malone era. You had Adrian Dantley and Darryl Griffith. How did you find the mix of players and personalities at that stage prior to the arrival of the 2 future Hall of Fame greats that obviously cemented your team?
Well, one of the traits of teams that win are they try and find 2 great players and then surround themselves with players who are good but can play roles. And we had Adrian Dantley, who was a 30-point-a-night scorer, Hall of Famer, great player out of Notre Dame, played at the great DeMatha High School in Washington, D.C. He could score night and you could just count on it. 30 points a night, every night. And Darryl Griffith was a great college player of the year, and he could shoot it from outside. He could run in the paint and dunk. And so it was really a matter of trying to learn about those players and how to best assist them. In fact, Adrian Dantley and I used to run a great pick and roll, which I really enjoyed. I scored more points playing with him than I did any other time in my career because he just had such a great way of kind of sucking that player in that was guarding him, getting him to roll off the screen, and then I would roll to the basket and he'd throw me this little lob pass, and we really had a good time playing with each other. The team overall, we made some improvements. I think my rookie year we won 30 games, and the next year we won 45 games when we added Thurl Bailey and Bobby Hansen. Frank would just tell us that, no one cares if you're scoring a lot of points on a losing team. Everyone wants to play us from a winning team. And he started getting us to try and trust each other, cooperate with each other. And the more we did that, he said, you more to make your teammates look good, the better you're going to look. And we started buying into that concept of not just being out there for ourselves, but really trying to make our teammates look better. And in the process, the team started winning, and then the individual accolades started showing up for us. I think my second year we had the NBA leader in block shots, scoring, steals, and 3-point accuracy, I believe, simply because we started playing together.
Yeah, and that's crucial, I guess, and that obviously helped carry your team up from 20-something win seasons up to 30, 40s and above. So that's very important too. Now, your 1985 season was fantastic. You averaged just a tick under 10 points a game. You had over 11 rebounds a contest and a remarkable 5.6 blocks per game, and you won the Defensive Player of the Year award. So incredible in the space of 4 or 5 years to then go from where you were to actually being the Defensive Player of the Year. You also had a string of 5 consecutive seasons of being all defensive honours as far as 3 first team and 2 second team. So where would you rate that 1985 season in terms of your best individually as well as helping the team as well, Mark?
I think it was probably the best year I had physically in terms of being strong all season long, not getting, I got injured at the end of the year, but I played well. I felt good that year. Our team was really, at that point in time, we had John Stockton, quite an asset for us. And I think just the more we had played together, the better we became as teammates and understanding each other out there on the court. So for me personally, the most exciting part was, again, having a great season and a winning season and making the playoffs. On top of that, I think I really sort of established myself as a great player that year because I blocked so many shots and players just kept testing me and testing me and testing me and coming in the paint, coming in the paint, coming in the paint. And we just sent those basketballs out the other direction.
I love that sort of stuff. So it's great to hear that. And in a game against the Portland Trailblazers in early 85, you blocked an incredible 14 shots. And from what I can tell, I think there's only 3 other players in history. It's Elmore Smith, Manute Bol, and Shaquille O'Neal who had more blocks in a single game. Were you aware in the moment when you're playing games and racking up these huge numbers of blocks or rebounds, or is it just something that just you read the box score after the game and learn about it that way?
Yeah, you have a sense that you maybe have a few more than you usually get on a night like that, but honestly, you have to go look at the box score, and of course, then you always hope the scorekeeper is doing a good job of keeping track of them.
That's right.
But because more than once, I thought I had a few more. But in any case, it's exciting. But the bottom line is you want to win the game. So I was always happy to have a great night blocking shots. But the most important thing for me was did it help us win the game?
Yeah, understandable. You've mentioned Frank Layden a couple of times, but he coached you for more than 6 seasons, and there's a classic quote, you can't teach height. I'm not sure if he said that or not, but can you talk about your relationship with...
He did, yes.
Yeah, he did say that. Great. Can you talk about your relationship a little bit with Frank and the impact that he had on your career?
Yeah, Frank was an interesting character in terms of being a guy who'd grown up in Brooklyn, New York, was a high school history teacher, football coach, and then rose up the ranks through becoming a collegiate basketball coach. But he always had this kind of blue-collar work ethic from Brooklyn, New York. I give him a lot of credit because he believed in me. He gave me an opportunity to come out and try out for the team and gave me a chance to play and believed enough in me to let me go out there and make some mistakes with the idea that he knew what he was going to build over time. And Frank was the greatest coach because he would always say things like, have you called your mother lately? Did you call your old high school coach lately? He was always about keeping it real and keeping everybody very grounded in the surrealistic world of the NBA. And just a great teacher, a friend, a guy, if you had trouble in the middle of the night at 2 o'clock in the morning, you could call him up and he'd come get you out of jail or whatever you needed, whatever needed to be done. That's just the kind of guy he is, a real minch. And he's one of my favorite coaches that I ever played for, and I still call him my friend. And in fact, lunch with him here about a month ago.
Excellent. So obviously he's very invested in his players both on and off the court. Now, in Australia here, I started following the NBA back in about 1989, but we didn't get a whole lot of exposure to the game on TV at that stage. But my first memory of Frank Layden, he was in an NBA entertainment video called Dazzling Dunks and Basketball Bloopers.
Right.
Him and Marv Albert, I think, were the sort of co-hosts on the video. So he seems like a very outgoing character. So that was my first exposure to him. And then obviously he coached you for almost half your career or even a little bit over.
Well, he did, and he was a real personality, and he used that to his advantage. And I talked to him about that one day, and I said, when you first came to Salt Lake City and the team was very bad and no one was coming to the games, I said, what did you do different? He says, well, I just used my personality. I was a funny guy, and so I got up and I told jokes, and I tried to give our team a face, something that the fans could relate to. And while you want them to relate to the players ultimately, having a coach who's got that kind of personality made him very popular very quickly, and I think helped build the brand of our team in this city.
Now, you're one of the greatest defensive centers in NBA history. There's no doubt about that. Who were some of the toughest players that you had to defend throughout your career?
Oh, I think early on in my early years, I remember guys like Bob Lanier and Artis Gilmore and, of course, Kareem. Then as I moved on in my career and played against Olajuwon and Patrick Ewing and Robert Parrish, Jack Sikma, guys like that were the classic big men who gave us a lot of trouble. Hakeem Olajuwon was probably the most difficult because he came from a soccer background, and while most guys I played against that were 7'2" or larger were not necessarily that quick, Hakeem, coming from this, having played soccer most of his life, had very quick feet, very quick hands, and created a lot of problems for me. And of course, they were in our division, so we played them, seemed like every other night. We had some great battles. When
you mentioned Kareem there, there's a series that stands out in my memory from 1988, I think it was, the Western Conference semifinals. I think you extended the Lakers to 7 games, and then they went on to win the title. Do you remember some of the battles that you guys had over that 7-game series?
Yeah, that series really established us as a team, I believe, even though we ultimately lost, that we took the Lakers right to the limit, and that was the Lakers. That team was one of the best teams ever with Magic and Kareem, James Worthy and Byron Scott, et cetera. I think from a personal belief in who we were as a team, that series really helped establish us and identify us, and I think gave us the self-confidence we needed to say, yeah, we can really compete at the top level in the NBA. And the Jazz continued to build on that for the next few years, eventually getting to the finals here, a little bit after I retired.
Indeed. And I'd like to just quickly touch on your All-Star year. It was a great season again for you in 1989. You were named an All-Star. The NBA coaches actually named you as a reserve, which I'm sure must have been a tremendous honour to get that acknowledgement. But Stockton and Malone were also on the West roster at that stage as well. The Mailman won MVP. And in the same season, you also won your second Defensive Player of the Year award. So how do you compare the All-Star selection with winning that Defensive Player of the Year award? Can you contrast those two?
The All-Star moment was very exciting. Number one, like you said, being named by the coaches was important to me. It's one thing to be voted in by fans, but voted in by your peers meant more to me personally. We played in the Astrodome. I didn't play a whole lot in the game because there's so many players, but played in front of, I think it was 39,000 people in the Houston Astrodome. It was just a huge place. So that was very exciting and meant a lot personally. And then being named Defensive Player of the Year a second time was very important to me too, because it was just another one of those stamp of approvals from the NBA that, like, this guy's for real, he's legitimate, and we had a great year that year as well.
So to win the award once is excellent, but to then win it a second time, some 4 years later as well, just sort of shows the longevity that you had and you could achieve at such an amazing height as well, given that you were 7'4". So you're remarkably healthy too. So I think you played in 79 or more regular season games in 10 of your 12 NBA seasons, I worked out. Now, eventually there's some knee and back-related issues, I think, that might have brought an end to your playing days. But John Stockton and Karl Malone were known for their health and how well they played over a long period of time without missing games, and you were right up there with them in that. What do you sort of attribute that to?
Well, we had a unique advantage with the Jazz in that we had a team chiropractor who was able to do a lot of muscle work and get you back from injuries much faster than traditional healthcare might allow. Between that, weightlifting and nutrition, I think we all took our jobs very seriously. We were all professionals. We all came to work ready to play every day. We got in great condition before the season ever started. A lot of players come to training camp to get in shape. John and Karl led the way. They were out running mountains and doing spin classes and everything else. So that, if you came into camp trying out for the team, you're going to pay attention to these two guys that are setting the tone for the training camp. And so you knew each year what was expected of you coming in. So I think that added to it as well. And there was some obviously fortune there, the fact that none of us ever really got seriously injured during our careers. A lot of it was simply the willingness to take care of ourselves and to really be professionals out there on the court and take our job seriously.
It would be remiss of me not to ask about Stockton and Malone, given this great opportunity to speak with you. So having been a teammate of them for 8-9 years, playing with them and experiencing all the things that you did with those guys, how great of players were they to be with on a team in a smaller market that probably didn't get the recognition that maybe truly they warranted nationwide?
Well, we'll start with Karl Malone first. He had to learn how to play down in the paint day in and day out. He had to learn how to take care of his body and he learned a lot from Adrian Dantley, who taught him how to really be a professional basketball player and the kind of conditioning that was required to play consistently night after night. And then being down in the paint, you're not going to get a lot of calls. The referees simply can't call all the fouls. And so you have to learn how to power your way through people to get to the basket. And Mailman became very proficient at that. Took great care of his body, just became a scoring machine and fun to watch, especially up close. John, on the other hand, was a guy who didn't talk that much, but just had an intensity about him that made everybody around him better. He simply wanted to win games. He really didn't want to talk to the press. Any of the other parts of being a professional athlete he really wasn't interested in. He wanted to go play basketball, win the game, and go home and play with his kids. And so he was a very completely different personality than you would expect to find in professional sports. But you wanted to play harder just being around him because of that intensity that he had. He was just simply there to win, and you could feel it the moment you walked in the locker room. And he was truly, I believe, the greatest player I ever played with.
Some really good insight there, thank you. Now, in the 1991 NBA season, the season opened up with some games in Tokyo, Japan, and over here in Australia. That was one of the games that we had broadcast here about a week after it happened, albeit your Utah Jazz took part in that against the Phoenix Suns. I think you played a back-to-back series with them in Japan. It might have even been the first regular season games from any professional team sport that were held outside the USA. What are your memories of that tour, Mark, and how were the teams received in Japan?
Well, playing in Japan was very unusual. The Japanese were so polite that they really didn't say or do anything while the game was going on, except when somebody scored a goal. When someone scored a goal, they clapped very politely, and then they were dead quiet again.
All right.
In the truly reserved way that they are in that culture. So that was a little different for us. But they were also huge fans. And after the game and walking through the streets and stuff, there were just dozens and dozens of people following you and taking pictures. But we really enjoyed our experience. It was great to be able to be a part of that inaugural, regular season game outside of the United States. And I think both teams enjoyed the experience, although it was certainly a long flight over there and a long flight back to then start the rest of the season.
Particularly as they were regular season games as well, so it made it a bit more important for everybody to recover as best possible. Now, I did mention towards the end of your playing days, you started suffering a couple of knee and back-related issues that ended your career, but you also had to sit out pretty much all the 1994 season. Do you mind just talking about your attempts to make it back onto the court and when you finally decided to call it quits?
Towards the end of that 93 season, I suffered a back. Well, I'd had knee surgery earlier in the year, and I was wearing a knee brace, and I don't think that helped my body much. And then my back started bothering me even more towards the latter part of the season. And once the season was over, I tried to go to physical therapy and rehabilitate it, but my body just wasn't responding. I wasn't able to train myself in the way that I knew I needed to do to come back. And I spent a few months just trying to figure out if there was something else I could do. But really by December the following season, I came to training camp for a couple of days. I couldn't go. I couldn't run as fast as I needed to run. And I knew that the time had come to move on. So I was on the team that following year and just kept trying to rehabilitate myself. But I also knew that the end was near. And later that season, I called a press conference and announced my retirement.
Was it difficult to finally admit that the injuries finally took their toll on you, or did you come to a point where you just accepted that had to be done and it was for the best of the team as well? How did that sort of work?
I got to the point where I just knew I couldn't train like I needed to train. I knew what was required to be an NBA player, and I couldn't do it. Yeah, it's never easy. You want to always retire on your own terms, but very few players get to do that. Usually your body has other ideas. So it was like, all right, well, now we'll go see what we're going to do next. But, the one thing I can say is I left it all out there on the court because I really couldn't walk or run another step at the end.
Yeah, well, that's true. You obviously put everything into your career, and what a fantastic playing career to have, and an incredible story that led to you even making the NBA and then having the great accomplishments that you did. I noticed that whilst you were a player in the NBA, you were involved with the Players Association as well, and then in post-retirement you also served almost 10 years, if I'm not mistaken, with the Retired Players Association as well. Do you mind just talking a little bit about your involvement with that and what maybe stood out from the period of time that you were with those organisations?
Well, I've always been very concerned about the other players and making sure that people took care of themselves, both physically and financially. And there's a lot of things pulling at you when you're a professional athlete. It was nice to have the Players Association and the Retired Association as someone to kind of look out for the other players and make sure that they have every opportunity to succeed. And so it was really just about serving my fellow players, and that's the reason I was a part of both of those organizations and still a part of the Retired Association even today. It was really just about making sure that we had the best working conditions possible and that guys themselves were doing everything they could to maximize their career and maximize their future.
When I was looking through your bio, it said that in 1997, and I wasn't aware of this at all, for about 8 seasons you hosted a TV show that was named Jazz Tonight. Unless I'm horribly mistaken, and you and Phil Bailey were actually playing some music on set, Jazz Tonight was actually a basketball-based show, correct?
Yeah, it was. We didn't play any music. Thurl plays a lot of music, and he sings.
There was a poor attempt at humor there.
Yeah, we did the pre-game and post-game shows for a number of years together, and I actually started doing it with Frank Layden just to kind of hang out with him a little bit more because we had such a good time. And then Thurl and I joined up and did that for a few years, and then I eventually stopped doing that, and I started doing motivational speaking, which is what I spend most of my time doing now.
And how did you find the transition from being a player and then some years down the line, then going behind the camera and doing the TV shows? And I know that you also had involvement with a radio show, another TV show as well. So you had plenty of other things that were going once your retirement from the NBA had happened.
Yeah, I've done a number of different things, and I think I like to learn things. I like to learn how things work and try different things, and TV was fun. I had a great time doing that for a few years, and working with my teammates was great. And then, then making the transition to do more corporate public speaking was a challenge to learn how to do it and figure out what to say and how to say it and why people would hire you to come speak and what they're looking for. But it's really been a great challenge, and I guess that's what keeps me going. Is I like the challenge of it, whether it was broadcasting or speaking or whatever I do. I'm always kind of looking for the next challenge.
I do have a question about your motivational speaking in just a moment, but a couple more quick questions if you don't mind, and you've been very generous with your time to date. Your Utah Jazz jersey was retired to the rafters in Utah, and then thanks to YouTube, in the lead up to this chat, I know that you were recently honoured by your high school and the junior college. Do you mind just quickly talking about what's your take on those achievements, having your jersey retired and being honoured by the schools that you attended in your formative years?
Well, I think from the NBA perspective and the Jazz, I mean, that's really the pinnacle of an athlete's career outside of winning a championship is having your jersey retired, and so that no player can ever wear that number again. That was a great, great honor bestowed upon me by the Jazz, and one of my great accomplishments, I think, and personally, it's important to me. And then my high school, my junior college, that just happened recently, and that was a lot of fun to be honored by both of them so many years later, that they recognized, the value of my career back, in the NBA and then back through the playing in junior college. The high school one, I'm not sure why they did that because I never played, and I think they just we're looking for some. There's starting a kind of a wall of fame of people that went to their high school that did big things after high school, and I just happened to be a part of that club. But it was a fun event, and it was fun to go back to the old high school. I hadn't been there in many, many years, so it was a great honor.
You mentioned your jersey number there with Utah. Obviously, that was number 53 that you were most known for. At Cypress Junior College, you wore number 35, I believe. I saw a photo of you with number 35 on. Is there some particular significance to the digits 3 and 5? And if you don't mind me asking?
No, there really aren't. Just completely picked at random. I wish there was some great story I could tell you about them, but there isn't.
That's just the numbers you went with. Fair enough.
Yeah.
Now, just the last question I'd like to ask you there, Mark. Since 2006, as you mentioned, you've been doing some business and motivational speaking. I'd imagine that your travel itinerary these days is still pretty hectic, and you're obviously a very busy guy. Do you mind just sort of elaborating a bit more on what you actually are up to these days and the amount of places that you must travel to within the US and maybe even abroad?
I speak about 80 times a year, and I do a program on teamwork called The 4 Commitments of a Winning Team, and it's focused on getting rid of that internal competition that most businesses deal with. And I speak to a lot of professional and trade associations, professional groups, and a lot of corporations, teaching them what teamwork is about from the inside out. It took me a few years to build the business, but it's going very well now, and I do travel extensively throughout the United States and Hawaii and Mexico a little bit. Haven't made it to Europe yet or down under, but maybe someday I will.
Yeah, so you've never been to Australia in general as far as even holidaying or things like that?
No, I never had it. It's on my bucket list to go, though. And actually, I do have a friend from high school that lives there in Queensland somewhere. So maybe someday I'll get down there in the next few years and come see your beautiful country because I've heard great things about it.
Yeah, it is a very nice place. And I guess, as you mentioned with the trip to Japan, though, the flight from the US to Australia is probably 16, 17 hours or something, so it's pretty crazy as well. So make sure you make the most of it when you do come. Now, just before we do go, Mark, what's the best way for people who are listening to perhaps keep in touch with what you're up to these days, or is there what would you like to do?
Yeah, my website is the easiest way, 7foot4.com. Just Google me, Mark Eaton. You can find me that way as well. That's the best way to stay in touch.
Fantastic. Now, again, thank you very much for your time today. It's been a pleasure chatting with you. And one of the first games I ever watched on TV and recorded on videotape back in the day was the 89 All-Star game. So I've got some fond memories of that and seeing you in the introductions there as well. So it means a lot to be able to chat with you some 89, 99, no, 25 years later.
You don't really need to get into that part. Yeah.
I don't want to date it too much. So, but yeah, thanks again for chatting with me. It's been a real thrill, and I wish you all the best with your speaking gigs in the future.
Okay, thanks, Adam. Pleasure talking to you.
Thanks again, Mark. It was great to be able to chat with you, and I really enjoyed our conversation. I encourage you to interact with the show, suggest topics for future episodes, or guests that you'd like to hear our conversations with. You can subscribe to my show in various ways, inallairness.com/iTunes. Alternatively, add it to your Stitcher playlist, inallairness.com/Stitcher. My RSS feed appears in the right-hand sidebar of my website. You can also subscribe to the show on Player FM, TuneIn Radio, and many other podcatchers. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed the show and share my web address with your friends and colleagues, inallairness.com. Check out the podcast archive for plenty more episodes with high-profile guests. Follow me on Twitter @inallairness. Please add your like to the show's social hub, facebook.com/inallairness. Join me next time for another edition of the show.